Hello there, and welcome to our webinar, Building a Business Case for Enterprise Search. Justifying enterprise search can be such a difficult task. I mean, we all know how bad search when we see it, and we're all very well aware of how much it impacts productivity. But today, the stakes are even higher. Most knowledge workers are foraging through up to a dozen different repositories to find the knowledge they need to answer customer questions, reduce risk, get products to market. In this webinar, we're going to address why you need to upgrade to AI-powered search and give you the business arguments you need to finally get buy-in. My name is Diane Burley. I'm the Vice President of Content for LucidWorks, and today I will be joined by special guest Dave Shavmel, Senior Research Director at IDC. The lines are muted, but you can interact with us by using the Q&A panel, and we'll take your questions as they come in. So let's find out how to build the business case for enterprise search. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Hi, Diane. Thanks for having me.
You know, I've known you for a long time, but I did not know that you actually started your career as a developer for a search engine, 1986? Is that right?
Yep. Yeah, that's actually true. I started as a project manager working for a long-gone company called BRS Information Technologies, which was developing a search engine back in the early 1980s. And we were one of the first people developing a C-based search engine. So it was interesting times. Back then, it was, a lot different than it is today. People actually still use paper and file cabinets and faxes and all those crazy things. And search was just kind of a part of what you were starting to think about. Today
it's a totally different world today, right?
Yeah, it's a completely different world today. So, in terms of the capabilities, I mean, we just see so much electronic data being created. IDC has estimated that the amount of data created for productivity and embedded data, essentially enterprise-related data, has grown, tremendously from, up to 5 zettabytes all the way up to, over almost 40 zettabytes by, 2023. And it's important to know that a zettabyte, is actually, a billion terabytes. So, it's a tremendous amount of data that's actually being created today.
What year did you start putting zettabytes in your presentations?
Oh, I think we started putting zettabytes in about, probably about 5 years ago. That was really when we started to, see people that the amount of data being created was, just increasing on an exponential level.
And of course, a lot of that data is really unstructured information, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. A tremendous amount of that information is textual in nature. And, even more important, we're seeing a lot of people actually recording speech, and voice and audio data, and also image data, image and videos. But the interesting thing about all of that is, it all comes back, to text at the end of the day, because, when people are speaking, what they're actually speaking is words. And the same thing when you're seeing that on video in a lot of cases. So there's just a tremendous amount of unstructured data out there. And, one of the biggest challenges that enterprises face is how you deal with all that unstructured data. When I went to school, at the university, everybody talked about, structured data, databases, and codicil databases and relational databases and things like that. But a lot of people never talked about all the unstructured data. And now it's the biggest part of an organization is all that unstructured data.
Well, and you were telling me before that even when you're putting in video blobs and voice audio recordings, people are transcribing that to text, and so you're getting both the blob and all the unstructured.
Exactly. It's at the end of the day, the way we communicate with our fellow human beings is through words. And those words end up being in terms of text. So even if it's voice recordings, even if it's image recordings, the lowest common denominator is actually the text that gets stored that's associated with those audio recordings or video recordings.
Yeah, and I think, and of course, folks listening, I've seen people in the financial services and healthcare, pharmaceutical. I mean, these are regulated industries where you need every scintilla of information from the beginning of any research that might be taken. Or I just closed on a house this morning, and I know that there were hordes of information that I had to sign off on, and that all has to be kept for the years of the loan plus whatever the number is after that. So we've become hoarders. We really are digital hoarders.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because, a decade ago, I visited a large pharmaceutical company that had just acquired a couple of other pharmaceutical companies. And, I asked about, their pharmaceutical research and things like that they were dealing with. And this is going back a decade. And they basically said, well, we have, essentially thousands and thousands of file cabinets full of prior research from the company we just acquired. And interestingly enough, that company had thousands and thousands of file cabinets from the companies that it acquired, and so on and so forth. So you're actually talking about, literally, essentially warehouses full of information going back into the 1950s as far as these pharmaceutical companies were concerned. And as far as the researchers were concerned, that information was all, opaque and hidden. They couldn't use any of that information.
Well, and now none of us are going into dusty archives to go and retrieve that information, but we are diving in and out of, tons of different silos. I read somewhere that for every 10 or so people that an enterprise has, they add a new system. Does that sound about right to you?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think we did a survey, and we said that, on average, the average knowledge worker, goes to at least 5 different repositories a day, to find the information they need to deal with what we're doing. And, a relatively, important percentage, I think 15%, are going to 10 or 11 or more repositories on a daily basis. So the idea is that there's all these content stores, whether it happens to be in your email, whether it happens to be, in your Slack system or in SharePoint, or whether it happens to be, in Salesforce or any of these other, or your ERP system that might be, a SAP or ERP system or an OpenText ERP system. You have all of these systems, and for the most part, organizations don't bring that information together to help them, help the knowledge workers find that information in the first place.
And then, then of course you want to search across all these different silos, and you can't. I mean, forget the fact that it's unstructured. Even if it's structured, they tend to not be in the same schema. So, so you've said you've seen all this progress in search, and you're talking about 35 years ago when you were first in it. In September, I heard you speak at Activate, the Search and AI conference, and you said search is just in its infancy. What are you seeing as the big change?
I mean, I think what we're really seeing is artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is a broad term, but we're seeing artificial intelligence, being applied to search and information retrieval in general. So you can think of it, the way that IDC looks at, artificial intelligence is we see, it being a multitude of technologies. A lot of folks just think that AI is machine learning, and it's really not. There's actually a broad set of technologies, and we've divided it up into 4 different categories. The first category is user data interaction. So things like natural language processing, where you're actually extracting the value from the text, understanding what the people, places, and things are, or what we call entities, are, in those, and also understanding what the relationships between those people, places, and things are. That's the role of natural language processing. There's also natural language generation, which actually uses natural language processing technologies to actually write text that's human readable, from a variety of structured or semi-structured data. So the user data interaction is really important, especially when you get into speech recognition and when you get into video analytics. All those things are important in terms of helping you understand what that unstructured content is all about. The next piece, that we really talk about is something called knowledge representation. And, semantic technologies have been around for, a while now. But what we're starting now to see is, natural language processing and all those things generating complete sets of knowledge representation, what we're calling knowledge graphs, okay? So you relate those people, places, and things to the relationships to other people, places, and things, and you can actually use that information. So that whole knowledge representation piece is being driven now by, machine learning and AI and all these kind of advanced technologies. So that also plays into it. So you take those two categories and you combine it with all of the advances we've been seeing in machine learning and neural networks. And now people can start taking that knowledge information and that user data interaction information and actually start to use it to predict or offer advice about, what documents should, I be getting when I'm working on a particular project, or what information would be most useful for me, or what kind of terms should I be looking for rather than, the terms I'm thinking of. What should the actual terms be that I look for when I'm doing information retrieval? So those are some, the kind of three. And then the most, probably advanced is this whole idea of automated reasoning. And we're seeing the combination of machine learning, knowledge representation, and user data interaction combining to provide automated reasoning capabilities so that essentially the system begins to think, or the application begins to, essentially be a virtual assistant for you, helping you surface content as you're going through. So that's kind of what, how we're thinking about, AI today, and in a broad sense, how it's, being applied to, search and information retrieval.
So how are you seeing it being applied?
So we're, as you can see here from this slide, we're seeing it being applied in a number of different ways. So we're seeing it being applied in conversational systems, where, people are actually using, interactive voice response systems, or they're actually using text-based conversational systems to answer people's questions. And the search systems behind these are using, AI and to provide the most relevant set of answers, but we're doing it in a conversational manner. We're also seeing, AI being applied as program advisors. So essentially, making recommendations about what kinds of products, a person might be interested in, or what kinds of content, if I'm developing a marketing presentation on, a new kind of automobile tire, who else in the organization has done something similar, and how do I get that information? AI is being used to surface that kind of content. Automated discovery is a huge area for where we're seeing AI be applied, because being able to come up with relevant documents for a legal process or a legal discovery process has always been quite difficult. And now we're seeing machine learning actually providing the expertise, that you might have seen, a litigator, an expert litigator have, to provide that kind of capability. Work automation, we're really seeing, AI being a key capability in helping us identify where in the process we should be going next. Should we be, helping to fill out this form, or should we be helping to, begin to pass this off to management. We're seeing AI helping you do that. And then, all of that combined together is really what we're talking about in terms of these digital assistant technologies.
So about a year ago, IDC did a survey with companies with more than 500 employees, and you had some really interesting findings. Can you go through that here?
Yeah, sure. So, essentially, in terms of what we're seeing is we asked about what kinds of use cases were people developing AI applications for. And it's interesting, a large portion of these involve search and information retrieval. So automated customer service agents helping people find the right information about solving their product problems, is one of the most important use cases that we saw in this survey. Fraud analysis and investigation, helping connect the dots between different sets of unstructured information and structured information, and helping identify when somebody is potentially going to do a fraudulent activity or be involved in fraud. Digital assistance for enterprise knowledge workers, this is in a lot of cases this is straight up search, where we're seeing the knowledge worker starting to work on a particular project. And I mentioned the developing a marketing presentation for a new type of automobile tire. And systems are actually we're beginning to see where people actually surface related content as you go about doing that kind of work. Obviously, regulatory intelligence is an important use case, and being able to find out, which regulations apply to me, which ones don't, so on and so forth. That's an area where we're seeing the combination of AI and search, automated claims processing, adaptive learning. Almost all of these systems that we've got here involve some aspect of information retrieval as a component of the broader AI application.
So folks listening, the takeaway is that this is what some of your competitors are up to. So if you're not, you probably should be thinking about it, right? Yeah.
So I think this was a survey that we did last January in the United States, and essentially we targeted the larger organizations that were already developing AI-based applications to ask them, what kinds of use cases they were asking, and these were the ones that popped at the top.
And then what were some of the data that was used for those applications? You've got that too.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, right at the top is textual data. As one would expect, it's the bulwark of the enterprise is text. We communicate via text, we communicate via email, chat, so on. So having, that textual data, being a big part was not a surprise. What was a surprise was the amount of image and video data that people are actually incorporating to their applications. That surprised us, because we didn't think that organizations were collecting as much video or images as they appeared to be, based on this survey. And then, audio and speech data, and conversational data, also continued to be important. So, I think it's not just limited to text. It also includes image and video data where you need to extract text from it, or audio and speech data that may be part of that image or video, or may just be an audio recording, and you also want to extract the text from that. So at the end of the day, it's all about text, but the data sources are widely varied.
So were they doing image recognition as well, or is this strictly the metadata associated with the images?
No, in fact, it goes well beyond the metadata. It's really,
okay.
Being able to, run, speech-to-text extraction. And there's actually a wealth of, commercial APIs out there that do a really good job of extracting, text from voice that a lot of people are making use of today.
And of course, when you're talking about image data, you're also talking about things like PDFs, I would assume, where you've taken, you've digitized, if you will, an application for a mortgage, for example, versus having the actual digital representation of it, having just a graphic of an image representation of it.
Exactly. So, some might be image PDFs and some might be text PDFs. So,
okay.
It kind of depends on which, if, let's say you're, scanning a pre-existing report from, the 1970s or the 1980s, in that particular case, you have an image PDF, and you're running some kind of optical character recognition to try to extract the text from that.
So with more and more data and more challenges, what is it that you're seeing that CDOs and CIOs are looking for?
So what we're seeing, in the marketplace is really that CDOs and CIOs want to bring all that information together, to make it available to their knowledge workers so that they have the right type of information to make their daily decisions. So having that real-time intelligence, coming in on a daily basis, whether that happens to be, coming from, a news feed or whether it happens to be coming from email or whatever, having that incorporated is a big part. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of is that organizations don't want cookie cutter type, search and retrieval. What they're really interested in is, personalized and contextualized information. So if I'm a marketing person, I'm interested in the report, the aspects of the reports that tell me what are the key features that I can help sell this product, as opposed to, say, the maintenance engineer who's really interested in the key features of the product manual as it relates to, solving a particular maintenance problem. So having contextualized information and personalized information based on each person's role, I think is something that it's kind of a holy grail from where people are looking for.
That's great.
I think some of the other areas is really looking at, people don't want to spend all their day looking for information. They really want to try to get that information, get it at their fingertips, have it available. And I think what's important here is we're not necessarily looking for the documents. What we're actually looking for is the actual answers to the questions that we have. So synthesizing information across documents and being able is also becoming part. And so that's why that unified visualization of knowledge assets across information silos becomes more and more important.
So I love January because it's always a good time to do all of our predictions for the year. What are you guys seeing? What are you predicting for the year and beyond?
Yeah, so I think IDC does a Futurescapes every year, and we basically do those on an annual basis. Our most recent set, the 2019 ones, we're predicting that we see that by over the next 5 years, that 50% of structured, repeatable tasks are going to be automated, and that 20% of workers in knowledge-intensive tasks, research, marketing, things like that, are going to have AI-infused software that helps them do their job faster and better. All right, and in terms of IT automation, we really see that by 2024, a third of the today's screen-based applications are going to be replaced by voice-enabled or conversational-enabled interfaces to actually help people answer those questions and to do their jobs more quickly. And in both of these cases, the bottom line or the elemental technology is search and information retrieval in both of these cases.
That last point is really interesting because what we're seeing on the marketing side is that more and more people are using mobile. As consumers, we use mobile to ask conversational queries of Google, where's the nearest restaurant near me? And I'm sure that that's carrying over to the workplace. I mean, we're losing Boolean as a skill set. It's sort of like we've dropped our prehistoric tail, and we're going to shed Boolean, and now we want to just be able to ask the question naturally. That's got to be impacting the enterprise.
Oh, it is. It is. We're just starting to see that. In fact, with a couple of colleagues, I just wrote a report about the emergence of digital assistants in the enterprise. And, I think that's going to be a huge operation. And, as I mentioned before, at the base of all of these conversational technologies is really, being able to answer questions and being able to provide information. And what do you do to do that? You use search and retrieval technologies to really, essentially drive those capabilities.
So again, I'm always thinking about our listeners, and they're over there scribbling notes and so on. And by the way, this is being recorded, so you'll get this and you can go back through it at your own leisure. But what does it take them to make search successful today?
I think what it takes is I think we've talked about the fact that we have a wide variety of content repositories, and we have a wide variety of types of content. So integrating and bringing all those content types and sources together is kind of a key aspect. It doesn't help a knowledge worker to only have a slice of the information he needs she needs to solve their daily business problems. You need information across the enterprise. So being able to have that information and being able to pull that information together, so integrating that together is an important capability. And then, as I mentioned, the idea of using, all of those capabilities I talked about earlier, the user data interaction, the knowledge representation, the machine learning, the applied reasoning, using all of those things together, becomes the capabilities where AI can really have an impact on, search and retrieval. And, a key portion of that is making everything relevant to what the person is looking for. So I mentioned, contextualized and personalized information. So, it's going beyond traditional, search relevancy where, in the old days we talked about recall and precision. How much documents can I recall? Can I recall all the ones that are potentially relevant? And precision, can I only get the ones that are potentially relevant? Well, now it's more than that. It's basically saying I want all of that, but I also want the ones that are most relevant to the problem that I'm trying to currently solve. So it really becomes much more personalized. Performance at scale. I mean, I think we talked about the fact that organizations are generating multiple terabytes and into the zettabytes of information. Being able to deal with that, at scale across the entire organization is something that people need to be able to deal with. And then, last but not least, ease of use. We've talked about how important conversation is. And I think what we're starting to see is that conversation is becoming the new user interface. So, having easy-to-use interfaces, but even more than that, having conversational capabilities or potentially conversational capabilities or tying into conversational capabilities, doing natural language queries and all that kind of thing, that's all an important piece to improving the ease of use.
Dave, in prior conversations, you pointed out that it's much easier to make the case for digital commerce because it's so measurable. They look at the conversion rate and the add to cart and all that sort of stuff. So I thought it might be fun to look at the tactics that some digital commerce search professionals are using and see what enterprise search folks can learn from this. So I'd like to share with you the survey that we did over the summer. We surveyed retailers doing more than $100 million in revenue. One of the key areas of concern was personalization, to your point earlier. They're looking at that search relevancy. When people are looking for products, they want to see products that actually relate to them. So what was fascinating, I think if you think of knowledge, information as products, and I don't think many of us do, but I do because that's the world I come out of, right, as a content person. think of the information as a product. So what are these personalization capabilities you might be using when you see that 73% of our consumers can specify the types or categories of products they want to view? So if you were within a corporation, what are those categories that you might want to see of content that may not currently be classified? If customers are shown recommendations based on similar customer activity, 70% of companies are doing that today. Again, wouldn't it be sort of cool if you could see what your colleagues are reading or looking at on a regular basis? I mean, we talk about this knowledge gap that's going to be coming along as baby boomers retire. This might be an interesting way to get people on a fast track of learning. 68% are collecting customer feedback signals. This is really something that the digital commerce brethren do all the time. And you were telling me the other day, Dave, that this really doesn't happen in enterprise, where you look at the query rewrite. When you type in mortgage, does mortgage equal loan? So somebody comes up with null, they go back and they rekey it. Maybe they had a typo. Maybe they used a synonym. And this type of gathering on the back end through the log files and being able to automate these types of thesauri really make it much easier for people to start finding the information, even if they're not using the same words that are actually in the classification right now. And again, 63% can create their product wish list. They've got digital personal shoppers. And right now, I guess 0 are specifying the volume of messaging they receive. But what do you think of those results? Is there any, do you see parallels like I do to information retrieval in enterprise?
I do. In fact, I think, in some ways this is kind of, think of this as the holy grail for what an enterprise should be thinking about. All right. So, you mentioned, customers can specify types or categories of products that they want to do. I think that's an important aspect, for enterprise search. If I happen to be, looking for research information, here at IDC, related to artificial intelligence in our content, I'd like to see the categories of types of AI, pop up automatically. That would be tremendous to me and help me, get through the things I'm looking for quickly. Customers shown recommendations based on similar customers' activities. I'm not the only AI analyst at IDC, so if I had, recommendations of what some of the other AI analysts happen to be looking at, or, in the case of, let's say we're talking about that marketing person that's doing the tire regulation, if they could talk to if they could see what the other marketing people, who are dealing with similar types of tire products, what kinds of things did they look for, in developing their marketing presentation? I think that's useful. Collecting customer feedback signals. One of the great things that we, want to see more organizations do is collect data on what their end users are actually searching for, and build that up as a data repository that AI and machine learning can use those customer feedback signals to actually help create that recommendation content, or the types of categories that they should see, or creating those kind of product wish lists. So all that's based on collecting, essentially real-time search data, aggregating that real-time search data, that log data, and then using that log data to improve, the quality of the search. So I think that's some of the key aspects of where, customer, commercial search and enterprise search really overlap.
It's funny, I wish I'd thought to do this, but these are some of the AI ML technologies that they're using to power the customer experience. And again, you could probably go back and slot them right into your pillars that you had in the beginning. But without reading through all this, because I don't want to make sure we get to questions. Again, you can see what people are leaning toward, and right now 50% of people, more than 50% of companies are using NLP to detect phrases and parts of speech. Obviously, everybody's thinking in terms of we've got to make sure that we're getting the answer to our customers' questions and helping them find what they're looking for as they adopt more and more natural language. I also want to share with you, Red Hat is a LucidWorks customer, and they indeed are they are a commerce company, but they have a ticket support system, right? And they took all of the information that is on their external website, and they used Fusion and AI-powered search, Fusion's AI-powered search, to create a better customer support portal. And what they were able to do is see that they were able to double their click-through rate. So people were searching, and before they were not finding the answer that they needed, and by doubling this click-through rate, they avoided about 50,000 support tickets and reduced their TCO by 91%. Compared to their previous self-service portal. So that is a tremendous savings. So for you companies that are thinking in terms of, self-service portals for your customers, or let's say you have a call center, you can create the same type of information retrieval on the inside and get your employees able to answer those questions accurately faster. So I thought that was rather interesting. And then Red Hat was thrilled that they were able to, provide the UI security and support needed without having to depend on their staff. So that's just one case study.
Well, the interesting thing about that, Diane, is that Solar was such a huge improvement over the proprietary search that we saw back 5-7 years ago. And now the AI-powered search capabilities of tools like Fusion and other products on the market is really providing that next level of capability on top of Solar, similar to what Solar did, against proprietary search. So, I mean, I think people, can really think about taking a step up, by adding these kind of AI capabilities.
It's true, and thank you. That actually made a great segue for this page, which is looking, if you're not familiar with Fusion, LucidWorks Fusion platform, it consists of, it's based on Apache Solar and Apache Spark. The nice thing about it, we ship with machine learning algorithms inside, but if you want to use your own, you can. There's full transparency. It's not a black box. You own your data. You own your algorithms. You can tweak, modify, change it up, whatever you want. And as Dave was saying, you can bring in all of this different types of data, including user signals, which I think is really probably one of the most important feedback mechanisms. And you can do that to power the workplace, commerce, the reports that have that very personalized information that he was speaking about before. And again, these are the different types of technologies that are in play in Fusion. And we certainly are happy to answer more questions at another time, but I'm wanting to be mindful that we're getting down to the wire here. I want to get through this. So what are some of the takeaways you think are really, really important that people should note?
So I think, really I think the key aspect is that, artificial intelligence and machine learning and AI technologies are here. They're real. They're very useful, especially as it relates. And I think you need to, organizations really need to think about, how they're going to, fuel and empower their workers, with these AI-inspired capabilities. And I think that's really a key message. And then, integration. You have to take all these repositories. You have to take all of these the different data sources that you have, and to make them most usable in the organization, you have to combine them together and bring them to the end user, to the knowledge worker, to get the most value out of the information that you have. And then, the last one that I really love is, people talk about the fact that AI is going to take away people's jobs, and it's not. It for the foreseeable future, and we're there. The foreseeable future is the next 2 decades, as far as I'm concerned. It's really about humans and machines. It's really about knowledge worker augmentation and empowerment using AI. So think of AI-powered search as your, virtual assistant helping you get that information that you need to do your daily job and do it better and quicker and be able to get that information that you didn't have access to prior to, to having these kind of capabilities.
Terrific. So we do have some time for some questions. Actually, we have some additional resources for those of you listening. And like I said, we will be recording this, and we'll be sending out the recording along with these resources. But we have an IDC white paper written by Dave, Empowering the Digital Workforce, the 5 Tenets of Success. We have the Enterprise Search Buyer's Guide, and we have LucidWorks is not just a search tool. So we have some really cool resources here that we'll also be sending out afterward. But I'd love to take some questions now, and we have quite a few coming in. So, and we'll take questions throughout. So one of the questions that just came in is, so what types of KPIs do you recommend organizations should consider?
So I think an important, KPI is actually asking, conducting end user surveys, about, how they like the enterprise search tools and the capabilities, and are they finding, the information. So having that information and actually, surveying your end users, and trying to do that, I think that's an important set of KPIs. I think other sets of KPIs is we talked about, maintaining search logs. And one of the things I found, over my, 30 years of being involved with search is a lot of people, come up with searches that don't come up with any answers. And I think, identifying which searches don't come up with any answers or come up with, bad answers, I think is an important aspect. I think another thing that folks can do is on their search interface is asking, the folks, did this search answer your question? And something as simple as that, can actually help you in your process of trying to improve your enterprise search capabilities. So I think in terms of those kinds of KPIs, looking at search user satisfaction, looking at, how much time, how many zero searches come up, and can you reduce that over time by improving your content or, improving, the information? I think those are some of the simple KPIs that you could use to try to improve, the overall search experience.
Another question that just came in, and it's really funny because I've thought about this for years, right? How do you get people to, sometimes the problem is not so much the data format or cleaning the data, and we all know that's a nightmare, but it's actually getting access to the data. And it really, that political, fiefdom stuff that sometimes goes in. So how have you seen this answered, Dave? The question is, to enable fully autonomous digital systems, you need to be able to have access to this data. So how does LucidWorks facilitate personal data permissioning? And
I think it's important. I think the first thing is, I think the CIO or the CDO, needs to have an approach that basically says, all information is available unless there's a security reason not to have it.
Right.
So I think, some organizations have a company culture that basically says, every piece of information is held, only by the people that actually created it and the people that real it, and there's this fiefdom approach. And I think that's a bad approach. I think the CDO and the CIO need to deal with the culture aspect, and basically say, information should be free-flowing and open, except where it, is required not to be, because of security, constraints or HR constraints or what have you. And the good news is, tools like LucidWorks Fusion and a lot of the SID have very robust, access controllers capabilities today. So, being able to handle that is well within the domain of the systems today. I think that just a lot of people are not interested in having that open sharing type approach. And I think that's a culture aspect that people actually need to think about. If we're all in this together in our organization, we're all in this together to make our organization better and to do the job we're supposed to do, we need to make information as widely available as possible, rather than you only get the little slice that you're responsible for. So, that takes a change in mindset, if you will.
So what do you think are some of the top barriers that prevent organizations from adopting AI or machine learning?
I think, some of the top one, probably the single biggest one, is, the fact that organizations don't want to devote any budgetary resources to search. People will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on their databases, and be able to implement those. But, everybody thinks that, search should be able to work automatically for $1.95. And the reality is it couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, it's not as costly as, the database people, but, there is a cost involved, and you need to have adequate resources. You need to have, both budgetary resources and human resources. And it's something that needs to be, watched, and it needs to have care and feeding of it, rather than, assigning a half a resource to it or two resources for a year, putting in a new search system, and then those two resources go off and do something else for the next 5 years. Search, like anything else, needs to evolve, and to be able to use those kind of capabilities, I think there needs to be adequate resources applied to it.
Right, and I think that goes back to your earlier point that there is this evolution, and if you had a survey that really showed people's satisfaction or dissatisfaction, and if we even did the log analysis like we do in commerce, where you could see the number of times people don't find anything, maybe these glaring things would be impetus enough to get people to want to invest in the future. I have two more questions I want to get to really quickly before we say goodbye for the afternoon. What are some suggestions for personalization of search results? How would you provide personalized content?
So I think to get the personalized content, you have to contain that log information for, what I've been looking for. And I think you need to take that log information and integrate it with my role, in the company. If I'm a pharmaceutical researcher, my role is different than, somebody in the marketing department. So I think you need to combine the logs of the people with similar roles, and be able to do your analysis based on role-based information, your log analysis and your models, your machine learning models based on that role-based information. And one of the things that we've seen in the commercial world, you were talking about the fact that, commercial search, is very important. A lot of the commercial companies have very detailed understanding of, who their customers are, at least in terms of demographics and what kinds of things they've bought in the past and things like that. So they have prior history, they have role-based information, and they use that to essentially drive the personalization aspects of the machine learning that they're putting in, to provide better relevancy. Does that answer the question, Diane?
I think it's great. And then the final question, the $64 million question, or whatever it costs, the $2.20 question, how do you build that ROI for business search? And it seems like it really depends on what industry you're in, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, what's ROI for a pharmaceutical researcher? An ROI for a pharmaceutical researcher is being able to figure out, with the information I have on my drug interactions and the information I have from previous company trials and things like that, can I figure out new use cases to, extend the life of an already existing drug? Okay, and that in terms it becomes new revenue, and so one good set of search information that helps me identify a new use for an existing drug can potentially yield millions of dollars of ROI in the pharmaceutical cable. In other cases, in the customer service, it's reducing, the amount of customer service, customer downtime, and having customer satisfaction increase. All right, so that's the ROI that you look at there. In terms of generic knowledge workers, it's how much more kind of productive can I be on a daily basis by having this kind of system. So in some of those cases that requires more work study to try to be able to do that. But in each and every case that you talk about, you can either figure out ways to save money or make more money, by improving search.
Sounds great. I'm going to have to let that be the final word. I want to thank Dave Chapnell from IDC for this tremendous presentation. It was really, really valuable. Thanks so much for joining us, Dave. And thank you, everyone, for coming and listening.
Thank you. Take care.